It's not whether we're going to be in a wider war. We are in a wider war right now as we speak. If Iran, in fact, is not moving towards developing a nuclear weapon, then the question becomes what kind of targets should Israel strike at in Iran? I believe they ought to look seriously at military targets. I think they ought to look at, frankly, some of the energy areas as well as targets. What they have to do in the end is make very clear that Iran is going to be weakened as a result of whatever strike Israel conducts.
All right, Leon Panetta, kind of on the same page as Donald Trump when it talks about military targets, whether that extends to nuclear targets, is anyone's guess. Dan Hoffman, the former CIA chief of station in Moscow, with us now. Dan, let's say that Israel does indeed go after military targets. I'm wondering, and again, from your former perch in Moscow and knowing Russia well, what would Vladimir Putin do?
You know, this is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive to our viewers, but Vladimir Putin is perfectly fine with Israel launching strikes on Iran as long as it doesn't threaten Iran's regime security. If Iran is not as strong in terms of their relationship with Russia, that means Putin can drive a harder bargain to secure access to Iran's drones and other things that Russia needs to carry on their war against Ukraine. Russia and Iran are long-term strategic rivals. I can tell you from the time I served as the director of the CIA's Near East Division and spent much time there in the Middle East, including in Iraq and in Israel, that these countries are playing Machiavellian, high-level transactional geopolitics. And Vladimir Putin is certainly watching carefully, but he's watching without the trepidation you might expect.
That's interesting. What about China, Dan?
Well, I think China also looking to take advantage of whatever opportunities they can to increase their influence in the Middle East. Both Russia and China want the United States to diminish our influence in the region, if not kick us out altogether. And so they'll take every opportunity to use their soft power to the extent that they have it to align themselves with the global South and with potential pockets of support in the Middle East. China has their sights set on Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The United States needs to be strong, and we need to play a strong role diplomatically to ensure that our adversaries, China and Russia in particular, don't fill the vacuum.
What do you make of the non-response, pretty much, and you follow this closer than I do, so I could be wrong, from the likes of Saudi Arabia and other more moderate Arab countries, Jordan comes to mind, not exactly ripping Israel and not exactly embracing Iran. I would imagine a couple of them would welcome up to something that would, cut Iran down to size.
They absolutely would. If you talk to Saudi officials in private, sometimes publicly too, they'll tell you that Iran is the head of the snake, that Hezbollah is a force for evil in the region, and quietly behind the scenes, they certainly support Israel. The challenge is that because Israel has so effectively taken the fight to Hamas and those civilian deaths in Gaza has made it very difficult for Saudi Arabia, Jordan in particular. Their populations are very much against what Israel is doing in Gaza, even though Israel's responding in self-defense, even though Hamas deliberately embeds themselves with civilians. Despite that, it's a very difficult, very challenging political situation for both of those countries as well as the UAE.
I'm wondering as well, Dan, where this takes Israel, if relations are so tense, and we certainly heard that in between the lines with Joe Biden in his first press remarks, at least in the conference room, talking about how they don't talk a lot. And we're told that Israel really didn't bounce off of the White House this planned response to deal with Hezbollah when it invaded southern Lebanon and took out Nasrallah. I'm just wondering what you make of that.
There's a lot of daylight right now between our two governments, although I would caution that I think we have very close relationships in the intelligence community, our respective intelligence communities, and in the military. But right now, in terms of policy, the Biden administration keeps emphasizing that they want to de-escalate, pursue a diplomatic solution. Israel's never accepted that. Going back to October 7, when Hamas launched their brutal attack, and Hezbollah started launching rockets, which forced 60, 70,000 Israelis to evacuate from the north and really degrade the economy there. Israel couldn't stand for that. I think Israel right now sees an opportunity where Iran's strategic depth, and that's their proxies, is severely weakened. And Israel may decide they want to take the fight to the enemy, not just military targets, not just energy, oil infrastructure, but perhaps Iran's nuclear program. And it's not just from the air. Israel's demonstrated an ability to run very sophisticated intelligence operations with boots on the ground and deep undercover sources to conduct their missions.
Dan, real quickly on that point, but there's a piece in the Financial Times today talking about Iran's barrage of ballistic missiles can oftentimes appear to overwhelm Israel's. They did put a number on it, but they do talk about a couple that did hit targets and all of that. But when the numbers go up, overwhelmingly Israel, with our help as well, is able to evade them, stop them. But if it's overwhelmed, if you double those number of missiles coming in, you'd really tax the dome system and all the other technology that they have. Do you buy that?
I think that's a challenge, and I think that's why Israel has benefited from support from the United States. Look, I think the larger question here is, have we crossed a tipping point here? Has Israel already gone so far that they cannot allow Iran and their proxies to reconstitute, lest Israel face an existential threat immediately to their state? And I think that's why Israel is more likely than not to launch disproportionate strikes. Biden administration is arguing for something proportionate. Israel needs escalation dominance, and perhaps even more than that. What the United States can do is look at the long-term strategic viability for Israel and maybe build out some post-conflict reconstruction plan in Lebanon where we drive a wedge between Hezbollah and the population which does not support Hezbollah. I think that's where we could potentially play a role.
Dan, thank you so much. Good seeing you again. Dan Hoffman, the former CIA station chief in Moscow.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.